Hello everyone, and welcome to NeoSystems webinar, Understanding DCAA, a Guide for Government Contractors. This is our third in a series of GovCon 101. In the first couple of webinars, we talked about direct versus indirect rates, and that really led into how you would do the pricing for your webinar, for your contracts, and then we dove into the contract types. And today we're going to talk about understanding DCAA so you can understand those requirements. And then in our future webinar on April 16th, we'll go into cash management, because once you won that contract, you're going to be hiring people, delivering, and you want to make sure that you have the cash flow to deliver on time to your customer. Even a profitable contract can have cash flow challenges, so this webinar will be particularly helpful. And then we're going to follow it up with a workshop, which will recap and bring together all these topics from beginning to end, bringing that cost information together, pricing it, understanding DCAA, bringing the contract types in, and doing the cash management, what you need to do before, during, and after winning that contract so you can deliver profitably and successfully to your government customer. That workshop is going to be on April 22nd at SCOR's offices in Washington, D.C. We're doing this webinar in conjunction with SCOR, which we're proud to be doing. One of the things I do want to highlight before we get too deep into our webinar is, why are we doing all this? DCAA requirements, they're pretty challenging. And the big reason is that DCAA comes into play a lot when you start getting into cost-plus contracts. So if you're going to be involved with cost-plus contracts, you need to be able to handle the DCAA requirements. Alternatively, if you're going to be avoiding cost-plus contracts, you're giving up 33% of the contracting dollars that are out there. That's from last year's data, which is fiscal year 14, which is actually up from the previous year. In fiscal year 13, it was 32%. So cost-plus contracts are continuing to be a way that the government is the contract types that the government is using. Our agenda today, we're going to go through some brief introductions. As I mentioned, we're excited to be doing this webinar with SCOR. Then we're going to get into DCAA, give an overview, get into the audit types, methods for staying ahead of the DCAA requirements. We'll have some fun going through the facts and the myths, the pitfalls, and then bring it all back together, talking about the benefits of all these best practices that we've covered in this webinar. And if at any point you have a question, please feel free to type your question into the question box. We'll be doing questions at the end. So as I said, we're excited to be doing this webinar with SCOR, and welcome to all the SCOR attendees. SCOR is a nonprofit organization that provides free and confidential business advice for entrepreneurs and small businesses. It gives you an opportunity to have face-to-face business mentoring and low-cost workshops like the one I mentioned. And you can get this confidential counseling from executives, successful executives that have been there, done that, and what better place to learn about how to solve your business challenges. If you have any more questions or need more information about SCOR, please check out their website. And now a little bit about NeoSystems. We focus on high compliance companies, nonprofits, government contractors, and commercial enterprises that find themselves in high compliance industry verticals. And we take care of the back office. We're proud to say, go ahead, we've got your back office. We do the accounting for government contractors, nonprofits. And we also provide the IT infrastructure. We host the software, the applications. We even provide help desk support. And we also support human capital. For instance, we'll help you with recruiting, onboarding, payroll, so you can staff your contracts after you win them and deliver them successfully and on time and on budget to your government customer. Quick overview of us. I'm just going to touch on a couple of points here. We have our offices in Tyson's Corner. We just opened up a new office in Orlando, Florida. We're in Huntsville and San Diego. Today we have over 575 clients in our hosting environment, our secure private cloud, and these represent over 45,000 employees doing their time and expense reports through our hosting environment. We've been on the Inc. 5000 list for 5 years, but what we're even more proud of is that over 30 of our clients are on the Inc. 5000 list as well. Enough about us. Now what I'd like to do is open it up to a poll, learn a little bit more about you, find out why you're attending today's webinar. Is DCAA, do you have a DCAA requirement in a current RFP you're working on? Did you recently get contacted by DCAA regarding an issue? Maybe you have an upcoming DCAA audit, or maybe you just have some general concerns and thought taking this time out of your day, this would be the right time for you to just get yourself a little bit more educated, get ahead of the curve. So if you can work on fill in that answer, I'm going to give this just a few more seconds. I see a few more people logging in their answers. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Close the poll. Let's see the results. Hey, that is wonderful. I'm glad to see so many people are trying to get ahead of the curve, get some general education. Second most popular answer, though, you have an upcoming DCAA audit. This is a good time to brush up on your DCAA knowledge so that you can avoid some of the pitfalls and make sure you have the latest information and can separate the facts from the myths. And DCAA is a current RFP requirement. Very good. All right. So with that, I'm going to be turning it over to Sean Chen. Sean is our Vice President of Client Services. He has over 18 years of experience in accounting and financial management roles with government contractors. He's responsible for delivering the strategic financial management advice to our clients, as well as overseeing the day-to-day accounting operations for them. Let me turn it over to Sean.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. For those that have been involved with the first two in the series, welcome back. So we'll go ahead and dive right in. What is DCAA? DCAA stands for Defense Contracting Audit Agency, and their purpose is essentially a liaison between the government agency that you're doing business with and the contractor itself. They monitor the cost and they make sure that you as a contractor are doing business honestly, and that the costs that you're reporting are fair and are invoiced fairly to the government. They coordinate with DCMA, which is the Defense Contract Management Agency, who has a particular arm and really more power than DCAA, and they're really known for conducting true financial audits, whether it's through your system review, which will have DCAA go through your system, make sure that costs can get allocated out correctly, and then ultimately they audit your yearly financials in what's called an Incur cost submission audit, which we'll get into a little bit later in the slides. So some of the DCAA audit types that are commonly known are your pre-award survey audits. So if you've gone after an RFP and you've submitted your pricing and the whole package, and if an agency is interested in possibly awarding your company the contract, they'll go through a pre-award survey audit, which is almost like a billing system audit. There is an incur cost audit or incur cost submission. So what that means is at the end of the year, if you have a cost plus type contract, or in fact a T&M type contract, and I'll go into that a little bit later, you're required sometimes in a T&M, but always in a cost plus type contract, you're required to submit your financials through an incurred cost submission. And DCA takes that information, reviews it, make sure that the costs are in line and everything looks good, and then they'll schedule an audit to come out to your company site and review and do some tests on those particular numbers. They also do cost estimate and price proposal audits to ensure that you're building up your costs correctly, you're burdening your costs correctly, and that you're not overblowing a certain price or a rate. They also do labor and timekeeping audits. They've been really behind in this particular field. A lot of times they'll just come over unannounced, or maybe they'll give you a 2 to 3 day leeway to make sure that all of your employees are filling out their time sheets correctly. And it's a completely random audit. They'll sometimes pick names, looking at your labor distribution or your employee roster, and just to make sure that no one is already, I guess, preset in what they need to do. Some of the other audits are your billing system audits, where they'll come in, take a look at your accounting system, making sure that the accounting system itself and the processes and procedures within that accounting system are adequate to bill the government. They'll do provisional rate audits if you've submitted provisional rates before. And as you all as a company grow bigger, you'll be required at some point to submit a CASB disclosure statement, and they'll conduct an audit on those. So some of the audits that we'll get into are pre-award survey audit. It's only requested by the contracting officer or the officer within that particular agency. If they want to see that your system, your accounting system, is adequate enough to bill the government, the contracting officer will request DCA to perform that system audit for your company. It's needed prior to award of cost reimbursable type contracts. So some of you all are familiar with that poll question, that that's part of the RFP requirement, is that you have to have an approved accounting system. So they don't actually review the accounting system itself. What they mean by system is that the internal processes and procedures that you as a company have implemented, and they want to make sure that those processes and procedures are followed for all costs from beginning to end, and end meaning financials are produced and invoices are sent out the door. So it validates your automated system calculations and allocations for all of your costs. So what are the risks on system audits? Well, if any of you all have gone through a system audit before, a lot of times DCA will nitpick on certain allocations or processes within your company. And depending on the nitpicking or the deficiency within your system, they will have that on record. And once you have a deficiency on record, they'll give you some time to basically correct it, make sure that it's flowing through the system correctly. And if it is, then they'll mark it as, they'll basically take it off. But the problem with having a deficiency on record is that DCAA right now is very backed up in all types of audits. And they have a relatively inexperienced workforce, so it could take, several months to several years for them to come back out and redo a system audit to make sure that your deficiency has been corrected. So, so some of the bullets underneath, it's difficult to pass once you've been deemed inadequate. And one of the things you have to make sure is that those processes and procedures and policies and procedures that you've implemented follow exactly the opposite of what that deficiency is. When you get a deficiency, the contracting officer that requested the system audit will be notified as well. and then things really follow. It will be difficult to win cost reimbursable type contracts once you have that. And again, just to reiterate, it can be an extended period of time before DCA comes back out to the company. So the incurred cost audit, again, it's an incurred cost submission that you, as a company, must submit if you have a cost reimbursable type contract or component of a contract. The incurred cost submission is completed annually. Each year following your fiscal year or your calendar year, you basically have 6 months to submit that to DCA. You can always request an extension through your local DCA audit. And what the incurred cost audit is that it's a thorough audit of all of your company financials, from your job cost summary, your invoicing, your labor distribution, your AP, even on management policies, board of director minutes. I mean, they'll take a look at everything to ensure that your costs are in line for what you've been billing the government. And the reason why they have these incurred cost audits is to protect the government, obviously. So if you've been billing the government at 30% G&A, and they come in and really see that your company is really operating at 10% G&A, that's a problem, and that's what they police. And they always perform this, obviously, to ensure compliance, and again, that the business conducted with the government is fair and just. So what are the risks? Obviously, the risks are in that particular scenario, that I described, where you're billing higher G&A than really what you're incurring. So when they complete an incurred cost submission and they finalize your particular rates, whatever the difference is, if you've been billing the government at a higher rate, but you ended the year at a lower rate on an actual basis, then essentially you owe back money to the government, and the government will ensure that you pay that. Now, subsequently, if you operate at a higher margin than what you've been billing the government, then essentially they'll understand that as well. They'll take that in consideration, and you'll ultimately be able to bill back the government the difference between what you've billed and what you've actually incurred. So some of the risks are your indirect rates are lower than targeted. And in those type of scenarios where your rates are drastically different, really DCA can come in and say, well, for the past few years, your rates have been significantly higher or lower than what you've proposed, and they can actually say this is what your G&A rate is going to be going forward, and you wouldn't really have anything to say about that. You also have the ability to lose existing contracts if your incurred cost submissions are considerably incorrect or always late. Once DCA deems your rates and decides your rates for you, then you could essentially become non-competitive, and it could take years for the company to be back in favor with DCA. Cost estimates and price proposal audits, and I apologize, this presentation is very wordy. It's really difficult to not put a lot of words when describing DCA, so it's kind of death by PowerPoint, so I apologize for that. So some of the cost estimates and price proposal audits, they're typically performed in larger RFP efforts. The rates can greatly vary, so why they would do a cost estimate and price proposal audit is, let's say, this is the first, there's an RFP out there, and you as a company, this is the first RFP you're going after that is $10 million. And where you're used to going after a $1 million job or a $2 million job, and you're essentially forward pricing out your rates. So they want to see how that scales. If you're building up your price proposal correctly, if you're building up your cost estimate correctly, and the way that that's done is that there will always be an unsanitized version being sent to DCAA or the government. And unsanitized means that they have insight into your fringe, your overhead, and your G&A, or whatever indirect rate pools that you have. And what they want to make sure is that you're building up this particular rate and you're allocating out costs correctly. So your teaming partners, your subs, and competitors that were involved in the cost estimate are also aware of those potential risks, and so they may not want to team with you or sub with you in future opportunities. It's added contracted cost, and it could involve you as a company restructuring your indirect rate pools. So a labor timekeeping audit is, again, typically random with no set date. Sometimes DCAA might give you a 2 to 3 day leeway to get prepared. And what they do is that they'll take an employee roster, pick out a few names from that particular roster, and actually interview them. And it seems funny because everyone knows that they're supposed to enter in their timesheet, and once a timekeeping audit has been announced, everyone freaks out, and of course everyone starts to fill out their timesheets on a daily basis. The interview part is actually the most interesting because they'll actually test employees. Okay, so you filled out your labor on this day for this particular contract. What would you do in this scenario? What would you do if you realize you didn't have enough funding on a particular task order, and would you move out that labor from one task to another? I mean, they'll ask questions like that. And, you know, as long as your employees are prepared to answer that, then there wouldn't be any type of red flags. But, you know, I've had clients where employees would answer, oh yeah, I've moved out my labor. There wasn't enough funding in that particular task. I moved it to another task, and even though the two tasks were for completely different types of work, you know, that's a red flag for DCAA, and that's why they do these timekeeping audits, not just to ensure that all the employees are filling out their timesheets on a daily basis, but they want to make sure that they're filling them out correctly, so that ultimately when you do invoice the government, they know that, okay, yeah, that labor is correct and it's at the appropriate task level. Again, the risks are result in loss of existing contracts. That's pretty severe. You can be disciplined for noncompliance. The contracting officer or the agency could review past invoices, and it could definitely impact your direct billing authorization, your past performance. If you have failed timesheet audits, it could result in, you know, you not being able to recompete for a contract that you already have. And the biggest thing is, you know, they can uncover fraud. They can uncover the falsifying of labor costs and the mismanagement of contracts. I mean, those are all black eyes for the company. So here's another slide that really just kind of reiterates what we've gone through. General areas of interest for DCAA audits are your indirect rate structures, how you have allocated out the base to the pool, They want to make sure that under your contract files that you have contract briefs, you have all the contract modification, the contract documents, and the invoices associated with all those contracts in files. They want to make sure that you have, if you've submitted provisional rates, that you have substantial supporting documentation for those provisional rates. Your financial policies, procedures, and internal controls. I know that in the previous 2 webinars that we've really focused on policies and procedures. Everything internally from a compliance standpoint falls under your policies and procedures, and it's very important that if you have those, that you're following all of those PMPs. And DCAA looks for opportunities to reduce or avoid costs being invoiced to the government. So some of the tips on staying ahead of the government, DCAA, is request a list of items to prepare. So if you know that, if you know you're interested in a system audit, for instance, and you want to go after a cost-plus type contract, get in contact with your local DCAA office, ask them for a list of items that they will be looking at so that you can prepare your company infrastructure for that type of audit. Request an estimated time frame or length that the audit will take. Sometimes audits can be done remotely. Sometimes audits, they'll have a group of or a team of auditors come to your company. You want to make sure that you understand what they're going to be doing, how long they're going to be there, and exactly what type of records they're going to be looked at. Know your basis of support, which means that when they ask you a question concerning your financials or your rates or your provisional rates, know what supporting documentation you need to show them. Document your audit log. Sometimes DCAA will tell you one thing and then put in their audit log something else. So have that documented. Know your contract terms and conditions for all of your contracts and tasks. And again, having the ability to provide the supporting schedules for the list of items that DCAA is requesting will save a lot of time and effort on both parties. And then final, when the audit report, when the audit is completed, request a copy of the audit report from your local audit office or whoever conducted the audit. So right now I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Brian for a trivia question, and then I'll be back online after.
Thanks, Sean. And yes, we wanted to mix things up a little bit here and give you a little trivia question. And if you recall at the beginning of the webinar, I talked about the SCORE workshop that we're going to be doing that recaps the 4 webinars that we're doing and brings it all together into an interactive session. So here's the question, and the winner of this will get a free pass. You're going to write in the question box your answer. So you know where the question box is? I'm trying to make this a level playing field here. Free pass to the workshop is what you'll win. What is the date of this upcoming SCORE workshop, Accounting for Government Contractors, that I talked about at the beginning of the webinar? See how many of you were paying attention at the very beginning? And looks like we have a winner. Wow, man, everyone's flying in now. Very good. So people were paying attention. So just so you know, the workshop is on April 22nd, and Stephanie Vichnis is our winner. So congratulations, Stephanie. We'll be in touch with you to help you get your free pass. So thank you, everybody, for participating in our fun little quiz. I hope you enjoyed it. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Sean so he can take us through these DCAA facts and myths and pitfalls. Take it away, Sean.
Okay, I guess these webinars have turned into game shows too. All right, well, congratulations, Stephanie. So we'll just dive right back into the webinar. Some of the DCAA facts, once DCA is involved heavily into your company, they can reduce or increase your rates. Be very aware of that, and that can hurt you as a company, especially if they determine what your rates are for the upcoming few years. So if you don't have good internal accounting records, you don't have good policies and procedures, and you're constantly submitting a provisional rate, for instance, that they can't understand how you're coming up with these rates, or you're billing certain rates to the government, you submit incurred cost submissions, and your rates are always considerably off, okay? They can say, well, since you have this contract, for the next few years of this particular contract, I'm going to tell you that your G&A rate is 16%. And if you have a significant amount of growth and you're adding in a few more admin type employees and G&A type employees, your G&A could be 20%. Well, you can't bill the government for that 20%. You can't even use that 20% for an RFP to do a rate build-up. You have to use what DCA has determined what your rate is, and that could significantly hurt your company. So that's definitely a fact. They do have the authority, along with DCMA, to force sanctions on a contractor. And this last bullet is pretty significant. I mean, right now they've lost a lot of senior type auditors. They are considerably behind on all types of audits, and the lack of experienced workforce that perform these type of audits, these inexperienced auditors are really following the book. Before, you could work with a DCA auditor if they have a question on a certain cost or a certain section within the incurred cost submission, as long as you had a reasonable explanation. This is probably like 10 years ago. As long as you had a reasonable explanation as to why you're doing something or why a cost is sitting in that particular bucket, it was a good chance that that auditor wouldn't include that in their audit log. But since the workforce really isn't very experienced, and stricter guidelines for DCAA, they're going to annotate every single little flaw that the company has. So just keep that in mind. Some of the myths about DCAA. In the RFP, it always says, you must have an approved accounting system from DCAA. They don't actually approve the accounting system or software. They approve the internal processes and procedures on how costs get allocated. And they will either send you an email as a formal type document saying, I find this company adequate to do business with the government, but they've gone away from approving the actual accounting system itself, and they went away with that many years ago. They don't assist companies in developing rates and rate structure, and they definitely don't provide advice. They'll tell you kind of where to go, but they won't provide advice to any contractor, concerning rates and how to do something and that sort of thing. So some of the pitfalls for you as a company is financial capability. Know that when you're producing invoices to the government, that your financials are in order from all the labor costs that get incurred in the company, all of your AP costs, all of your accrued expenses that are being allocated out correctly. A lot of companies automatically get in trouble with the way that they produce the financials. Having inadequate policies and procedures. cover all grounds on policy and procedures. So for your procedures, have procedures for how you handle accounts payable, how you handle accounts receivable, how you handle billing, revenue recognition, GL account creation, journal entries, all of those type of things. Understand all of your contract provisions. Know your contracts inside and out. You know, the funding levels. Are you able to invoice for all of the ODCs? Are you able to put fee on ODCs? Are you not able to put fee on ODCs? That type of thing. Internal control management follows pretty much the same as your policy and procedures. Your management policies, make sure that those are up to date, including your employee handbook type policies. And if you run a system where the accounting system doesn't have the ability to clearly distinguish between direct costs and indirect costs, make sure that you have some type of supporting documentation or Excel spreadsheet on the side that's able to clearly distinguish those. And the inability to provide supporting documentation. That's a really big problem for some of these smaller companies, is that they think they have, you know, the spreadsheets that are needed to be in compliance with the government, but in fact when they're asked to provide that supporting documentation that exists on the spreadsheet, they're not able to do it. So some of the benefits of having DCA is, on your side, or interactions with DCA, is that you're able to have approved provisional rates each year. We've gone through provisional rates in the first two webinar series, so I'll briefly go over what they are. Provisional rates are essentially your budget for the upcoming year. So you factor in your potential wins, you factor in your potential FTEs that you're going to be adding for that particular year, and you forecast out what your rates will look like. What this does is that this gives you an advantage when you go after an opportunity, because the more FTEs you add that are fully billable, they go directly to the base, and any cost going to your base of your indirect rates will lower your indirect rates, hence will make you more competitive for all upcoming opportunities for that particular year. Again, if you're able to do that, if you have the capability to structure provisional rates, then it'll give you the ability to be competitive year in and year out. You can be awarded all contract types, so provisional rates really work for cost plus, obviously, but they help you be more competitive in T&M rates, and the same for your fixed price type contracts. Having an adequate accounting system, so if you've gone through a system audit and your company has been deemed adequate, gives you a major advantage when you're going after RFPs that have that particular RFP requirement. One, you'll know that you'll be able to check that box confidently, and also you know that your financials are in order, essentially. Okay, I've never seen a company that has an adequate accounting system, but their financials are a mess. The two are basically married together. It really, the final message is that it gives you the ability to monitor your costs, your rates, and gives you as executives easier decision making from a financial perspective if you have your financials in order. So this rate buildup has been shown as an example in the first two webinar series, and for those that are just joining us today, this is how you basically build up a rate. So you take a salary of a $100,000 employee, and the raw labor cost per hour for that particular employee is $48 an hour. Excuse me. You add in fringe on top of that, which is a $15.39, and then you add in the overhead, which would be the raw labor plus the fringe times the overhead. And then to add in G&A, you add in the raw labor, fringe dollars, and overhead dollars, multiply that by the G&A. So that gives you a total cost of your employee there at the $85 an hour. And then obviously everyone wants to add in some fee, whatever that percentage is, and you come up with a total bill rate or total profitability rate of your employee. And to calculate all of that simply, you can develop a wrap rate, which is, in this scenario, it's 1.767 without fee. And there's the little animation slide there that shows you the formula on how to correctly burden a rate. So the final slide here before I turn it back over to Brian are the limitation of QuickBooks and Peachtree and some of the other, I would say rather inexpensive accounting systems. You can modify your closed months, and that's a big red flag for DCAA. They want a system to be able to hard close so that if you do have any adjustments in a prior month, you make those adjustments in your current month so that that audit trail always exists. Some of the reporting features within QuickBooks or Peachtree aren't adequate for what DCAA is looking at. They want to see really your indirect rates being calculated automatically through the cost being incurred through the system. And again, need written policy and procedures that follow basically all three of the above items. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Brian, and I'll be back on to answer any questions that you all may have.
Thank you, Sean. And with that, we're going to open up to another poll question. We want to get a sense of, what accounting systems are you using? Do we have people out there who are using QuickBooks today? Are they using Peachtree? Are they on a Deltek system like GCS or CostPoint? Perhaps you're on Microsoft Dynamics SL, or there's another. I mean, there are so many systems out there. If you do check other, I'd really appreciate it if you would just write in the question box what you're using so we can get a sense of what systems people are using. I always like to know what people are using who are doing government contracting, keep ourselves a good pulse on that. And as people fill in the poll, I'll give you a few more seconds here. I find whenever I say that, it inspires people to start finishing it up. So 5 seconds, 4, 3, 2, 1. Close the poll. Let's share the results. Okay. Good number of you, roughly half of you are on QuickBooks. So I hope you've understand some of the challenges, and I hope you have good procedures to help you avoid some of the, to help you be more DCAA compliant. Some on Peachtree, good share on Deltek, and roughly same percentage on other. So like I said, if you are on other, please type something in the question box that would let us know what system you're on. That would be terrific. Okay, as we continue, we want to talk to you about some other resources that are available to you. Sean has mentioned, SBA. We're doing this with SCORE. Great resource available to you. He's mentioned DCAA, and if you wanted to get documentation directly from them, that's available. Of course, being compliant with the FAR is also very important. So, if you were looking for where's the actual documentation, where is that FAR clause, that's where you would go. And also, another resource for you to use is continuing with these webinars in the series that we're doing. So if you are interested in signing up for our cash management webinar, that registration is open and available, as well as the workshop registration that is open as well. And it's a small fee that SCORE provides. All that money goes to SCORE, the nonprofit. We at NeoSystems do not. We participate, and we're happy to provide all this education free of charge. And so, moving along, other resources. We do have training courses here at NeoSystems. We do charge for our training courses. We have our blog, which we go into many of these topics. Some very interesting ones have come up over time where people had questions, which we were then able to address some of the challenges that people have faced or things that we've uncovered and kind of the lessons learned. We like to share those out on our blog. And if at any time you want to just email us a question, please feel free to email us at growahead@neosystemscorp.com. So with that, we're going to be opening it up to your questions. If you have a question, please feel free to type it into the question box. We always get the question, will the slide deck be available? And yes, we will be making the slide deck available to the attendees today. If you wanted one of the slide decks from the previous presentations, please I would just type in the question box. Please send slide decks from previous presentations. We'd be happy to do that. And while Sean's looking over all these questions that are now flooding in.
Okay, so let's go through some of the questions here. So the first question is, DCAA auditors maximizing the cost benefit for contractors. Is the interest rate or benefit maximized for all contractors for similar contract work? Whoever asked that question, if you want to email me offline so I can get a better understanding of that, that would be great, and then I can hopefully help you with that particular question. So going to the next one, what written policies and procedures do you believe need to be done? Well, I can tell you the basic ones are all of, obviously, employee handbook is key. And within that employee handbook, you should definitely have a timesheet keeping policy, a expense reimbursement policy so that DCA can look at travel and how you reimburse your employees, and then having your PMPs for all of your accounting functions and your HR functions. I mean, those are ones to definitely start to have. As you get more advanced, and you can fill in a lot more. We have over, how many do we have in our policy and procedure application? We probably have over 300 type templates for policy and procedures. And so if you ever need an example of some of those PMPs, feel free to email Brian or myself, and we can see what we can do for you.
Sean, I see a question up there, and I'm going to broaden it a little bit. It says, does DCAA have purview over HUD contracts? And I guess that's a good question because, it is the defense contracting audit agency. So where does DCAA fit in? Who do they have purview over, and who do they not have purview over? And I know that might be a kind of a loaded trick question there, so I'll let you answer it as best you can.
Yeah, I think, okay, so DCAA actually used to have a lot more power than they do now. They've gotten in trouble, and I don't have enough time to kind of go into what exactly happened, but the DCMA has more control over DCAA now, whereas before it was the other way around. DCAA really had a lot of power to do a lot more to contractors based on what the government was telling them. So now it's more of a DCMA component where they direct DCAA to do a lot of their bidding and their work. So they've lost a significant amount of power, but they're, obviously they're still pretty significant in the contracting world.
Okay.
All right. How is a big contracting company different from a small contracting company? By the nature of the large work or the quality and quantity of human resources? Well, big versus small is really depending. It's all dependent on your revenue size. They look at revenue size when determining SBA type certifications. Are you qualified to go after some set-aside work? And depending on your revenue threshold, they either put you in a small, medium, or large corporation. For instance, for forward pricing, if you were to get into forward pricing, as a small contractor, you wouldn't be able to submit actual forward pricing rates. You could submit provisional rates, and the two are actually completely different, even though they achieve the same objective. But large contractors typically are able to submit forward pricing rates that need to be approved before even submitting an RFP. And typically, you're looking at companies that are going after $100 million deals, and that'll significantly change a division or a component of the company or the company overall. Okay, so let's see.
Yeah, and one of the things we enjoy putting on these webinars, and one thing I'll also suggest, if you have any topics that you'd like us to cover, you can put that in the question box as well. I'm going to ask that you put the word future in front of it so we can distinguish between that and other questions as we're doing this right now. But if you have a topic you'd like us to cover, please feel free to say future topic and whatever it is. More in depth on provisional rates or forward pricing, whatever would be of interest to you, please feel free to type that in.
Okay, so then looks like the last question, does DCAA have purview over HUD type contracts? Yes, they do. Some agencies have their own agencies that act like DCAA. For instance, National Institute of Health has their own audit agencies that perform the incurred cost submission type audits. So for your question, the DCAA does review HUD type contracts.
All right, very good. All right, I think that's going to wrap us up for today. I appreciate everybody's participation. Thank you very much on behalf of SCORE and NeoSystems for joining us today. If you want to register for the next webinar, it is available either on our site or you'll be getting a registration. Well, in our follow-up email, we'll have that information, as well as a link to the SCORE workshop down in Washington, D.C. So once again, thank you very much for joining us today.